welcome to our next episode of Working Progress. Today I'm excited to invite not one, but two guests as we talk in our beautiful Mind Science Center about AI, or artificial intelligence. So help me welcome our guests, Chris Helt. Thanks for joining us today, Chris.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And Chris is the Chief Technology Officer here at TTI Success Insights. We're going to get a little bit more into that in just a moment. And our second guest, who I'm very excited is joining us today, is Courtney Kingsbury. And Courtney is a product owner here at TTI.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us and having this conversation today. All right. So Chris, tell us a little bit. You're a Chief Technology Officer. Sounds like a big responsibility and like a very detailed job. What is it that you do here at TTI?
Oh, absolutely. I like to joke that my job is that, if it doesn't work, it's my fault.
So we blame you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good.
But no, I oversee everything from software development, hardware infrastructure, security. Essentially, if it touches technology, then it's within my team's purview. But we build the tools that deliver the assessments, that deliver survey, that empower Courtney to do translations and to bring all of our stuff worldwide, and just keeping the lights on. And, we try to make it look easy, but there's a lot that happens under the hood.
So it's a good thing that we don't necessarily know lots about you, because that means you're doing your job well, is what I'm hearing you say.
That's why I like to joke, is that if people are noticing me, it's probably a bad thing, because when I'm doing my job well, you don't notice that anything's different.
Awesome. And we appreciate that work. We do. And Courtney, can you tell us a little bit about what's a product owner and how do you play your part? Chris mentioned translations.
Absolutely. So I work on taking the translations done by our partners, or at this point AI, and making them available for our reports and questionnaires around the world. On top of that, I'm also the facilitator on the product team. So we've been working with some new agile-like methodologies. So I get to be a part of that as well and facilitate all of those meetings.
Which you're crushing, by the way. I got to sit through one yesterday. And folks who join us for 40 Forward will actually learn a little bit more about what you do and what both of your teams are kind of doing in that sense. But today we're going to talk about probably just a little sliver of your overall roles, which is AI, or artificial intelligence. So let's start from the basics. What's artificial intelligence, or AI?
Well, people want to think that it's magic. It's not. It's just math. And it's not particularly new. We've been doing these kinds of things for quite a long time. The industry has changed a lot in the last decade. There have been new tools and techniques developed, but it's fundamentally the same thing. All we're really doing is just taking inputs and mapping them to outputs, just mathematical functions. And we're finding new and interesting ways to apply these techniques. But it's not some new magical thing that appeared out of nowhere. It's been this long iterative process that has happened over decades. And what's really exciting is that we've reached a point where the tools have entered this place where they aren't accessible just to data scientists, just to people who are really into linear algebra. With the advent of ChatGPT, people started seeing these tools and thinking, oh, I could use that to do this or to do that. And so it's an exciting frontier for a lot of people who have never been in this space. But it's also, it's not the apocalypse. It's not, the dawn of Skynet just yet.
Good to know. So what I'm hearing you say is, this is not new. It's just new to the mass population. It's just now accessible to those of us who are not as intelligent as folks like you.
Well, it's new in that we've gotten better at doing certain things quickly enough to be useful. So the techniques have improved. There have been breakthroughs in the theory and how we process this huge quantity of data and all of these numbers. And how do we actually make this run quickly enough that people don't get bored and walk away? Mm-hmm. And that unlocks new potential that we didn't have before, because if you have to wait for a week to get a result, you're not really improving your productivity.
No, I'm out of there. There's no way that's happening.
And, in the last few years, we have developed improvements in hardware, improvements in technique, improvements in software that have kind of pushed us past this critical point where now all of a sudden we can think about how we apply these techniques in all kinds of squishy scenarios. So we're all used to math in school where you have a particular problem formulation and a particular input and a particular output. And that's how we've done problem solving in business for a long time. If you think about spreadsheets, you have your spreadsheet and you develop your formulas and you put in your inputs and you get your answers, and that works really well. And AI tools like this are unfathomably huge spreadsheets that have the ability to kind of self-discover the formulas that you need to transform the data that you have into the answers that you want.
And one really good example of that is if you go into your Netflix queue and it recommends something for you, that's AI. It's learned what you've liked and it's taking that, putting it into an algorithm and deciding what you should watch next. So everyone is using AI right now. They may just not be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great example. And a giant spreadsheet that is incomprehensible to me. It is, that's really basic, right? Anything you'd add about when you're talking to folks about AI and you describe it? Anything else that you would add or another way to describe it?
The best way I've heard it described for layman's terms is our Australian MD said it is the great accelerator of this generation. So this is something that is going to not replace people, but to accelerate them. And when you're not bogged down by the mundane little mediocre tasks that you do every single day, you're freed up to do more things. And this is going to accelerate all of that.
Yeah. So a little shout out to you, Courtney. You kind of have spearheaded showing some of us here internally how to utilize some of the tools in ways that just make us work smarter and accelerate the work we're doing. So if I don't want to have to go deal with numbers and data and crunch it all, you're like, well, go put it in AI. It'll help do that for you as long as you understand the right questions to ask.
Correct. And as long as you understand how to come to the right end result and you can double check the results because it is fallible. It is something that is programmed by humans. So it is subject to our bias and our limitations.
So it's not 100% accurate.
Not always.
Absolutely not.
Why?
Well, so when most people think about AI now, they're thinking about large language models like ChatGPT. Large language models are not knowledge models. They're not a search across a giant index of information that's been collected and curated. What they are is they are a way to understand and to replicate human language. And as it turns out, there's a lot of our knowledge wrapped up in our language. The way that they train these things is they collect all the written text they can. So, there's been a huge amount of text produced on the internet, and they show up half of a sentence to the network and say, okay, now predict the next word, predict the way to finish the sentence. And you do that over and over and over, billions and billions of times. And the network starts to learn connections between words, connections between phrases of words, and can develop the ability to predict the next word given a sequence. These tools will always predict the next word, even if there's not necessarily a way to know what the next word should be. It's going to take a guess. So one of my favorite examples of the way that this works, my brother was very excited when ChatGPT came out because one of his hobbies has been tracking down our family genealogy. And we've got that tracked back to the early 1600s, which is really cool. But there's this gap that he had not been able to fill. And he plugged some genealogy stuff into ChatGPT, and it came back with the missing ancestors, and it blew his mind. And I said, well, wait a second. Have you actually gone and double checked that? It sounded plausible. It was in the same tone. It sounded like this could have been one of our ancestors. It was in the right geographical area. And it even provided citations for which records we could go and find this genealogical information in. And I told him, no, go double check that. And it turns out it had not only fabricated these records, it had fabricated the journals that were supposedly containing these records. And it's not that it's lying. It's just that it knows what a plausible response to a given input is, and it can produce a plausible response. So there's not an intentionality to lie or an intentionality to deceive. There's also not an intentionality to tell the truth. These are just probability engines. And they are very, very good at picking words that probably sound right.
Yeah, it's a mathematical equation. They're trying to get as close to what they think the answer is as possible.
Still kind of sounds like magic to me, but I'm going to trust both of you because you're way better at math than I am.
It definitely looks like magic. I'll grant
Sure,
it that.
Sure.
It is, I think it's the closest thing to magic that I've seen in my lifetime. And it blew my mind the first couple of times I saw it until I really started to try to understand what was happening. And then I realized, oh, it's a gigantic function that is larger than I can hold in my head. And okay, it's really cool that it works. And one of the cool things about it is that there's an ongoing area of research to understand why it works. We don't really understand the specifics of why it works. We can see that it does. And we can see that when we put certain things in, certain things happen inside this network, and then we get the output out. But we are actively working on understanding what it is that's happening, that, what emergent properties of language have been captured in these models. We don't necessarily understand those, but there's some really interesting implications for our ability to understand intelligence and maybe eventually consciousness. But I think that's probably further off than we'd like to think.
The singularity is not near.
I'm doubtful, but everybody has an opinion there.
The singularity is the combination of the human interaction with machine, for anyone who doesn't know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for catching those of us up who may be going, huh?
Sure.
So talk to us a little bit about, aside from the fact that it is a hot topic, it is a buzzword. We hear it all over the place. We hear great things. We hear not so great things. But why should we care in the TTI community, our network of partners, the folks that we're working with? Why should we care about what's happening in this realm or in AI? I mean, Courtney, I kind of alluded to it. You're helping us be a little bit more efficient in our day-to-day work and maybe, not do some of the stuff that's not so exciting to us. But why should somebody care about this?
I mean, besides accelerating the tasks that you don't want to have to do every single day, one of the really cool things that we've been able to use it at TTI with is back translation. So checking the efficiency of languages that we don't necessarily speak to know how they've translated from the source English into whatever language it is. So I can now go and score on a scale of 1 to 5 if a translation is accurate based on the concept, not the words, but the concept being translated. And then if it's anything lower than a certain number, it actually recommends a different translation, which we then go check with human translators. And we've seen such a shift in the concepts being translated more clearly, more succinctly. People seem to be giving us feedback that it's a lot easier to understand in these other languages. So it is definitely something people should care about from a standpoint of being able to understand each other better, being able to, make that email sound a lot better, a lot faster. It's fantastic in that respect. So that's how I'm using it, at least at TTI.
Well, and can I tell on you a little bit more? I heard you don't necessarily have to know all the languages because you can utilize it to speak with or communicate with people that use a different language. So say you're talking to someone in Italy, ChatGPT or some other system, because that's not the only one out there, can help you communicate with that person. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yes. There's a lot of back and forth when I'm working with people in other countries. And while they speak English, it's not their first language. So in a lot of cases, it is easier for technical instructions to just be translated into Italian in that example. And it makes it a lot easier for us to communicate with each other because then they're using it to translate what they're saying back to me into English. And it's a lot clearer for everyone around. even by setting your settings in ChatGPT specifically, you can have it say, you know, all of your communications should be run through a filter of you're talking to someone where their English is their second language. So every communication that I send out already takes that into account that I run through ChatGPT. So it makes it easier to communicate, even though I only speak English and a little bit of Spanish.
So it's actually amplifying the assessments and the work that we do on an even different level.
Yes.
Awesome. From your perspective, because you're coming at it from a little bit of a different angle, right?
Yeah.
You're not necessarily in the day-to-day with some of our partners, our master distributors, folks like that. What's your perspective of why folks in our network should care about this?
Well, pardon me. I think that Courtney said it best. It's an accelerator. And these tools can be used to amplify your existing effectiveness, your effort, and to just make you more productive. My team uses AI-based tools to assist with writing code. And it's not doing anything that we couldn't do already, but it shortens the amount of time that it takes for us to express a given solution. Once we've already arrived at the solution, we still have to figure out how to translate this into code, how to make it work with our code base. And it's the kind of thing that just shortens the productivity cycle so that we can do more in less time. And I think that's true for most applications of this stuff. To Courtney's point, Google Translate has been AI-based for years and years and years now, well before ChatGPT came along. But the introduction of these large language models has made those translations even more powerful, such that she can condition it for a given audience. She can condition it for a given use case. And thinking about those nuances is where we really find those productivity gains, where we can not just use this hammer to kind of, hack together a solution, but you can actually kind of have a customized tool that can work for the specific task that you are solving very effectively. What that task is going to be different for every person. It's going to be very different based on your industry, based on your audience, based on what it is that you're trying to do. But we have these kind of amorphous blobs of clay now that we can shape into all these various tools. So it's really up to us to figure out what those applications are, but the toolbox is a lot bigger now.
Mm. Well, and I'd say it's also fair to say, as you're using this, also double check. Because some of the common concerns about AR, well, aside from like the, oh my gosh, it's taking over the world, right? When we go back to that. But part of the concern is, how do I know it's feeding me correct responses or valid information? So if I'm a partner and I'm thinking, oh, well, let me kind of hack this debrief a little bit by dumping this into something, what should we think about, or what should we be paying attention to? Should we be doing that? How does that impact what you're getting back? Or what are some other, things we should be thinking about as we're using it in the day-to-day?
Certainly.
If I'm a partner of TTI.
So ChatGPT and equivalent tools don't have specific awareness of TTI's business and language and jargon. It knows things like DISC because it's been around for a while and people have been talking about it for a while. And if we're talking about 12 driving forces, it knows about the words that we use for each of the 12 driving forces, but there are distinctions within our tools that maybe don't map to the general understanding of one of these words, one of these factors. And so it's possible for it to kind of go off into the weeds a little bit and to provide an elaboration that maybe isn't necessarily on point with what we want to communicate specifically. So as a partner, it's up to you as a domain expert, as somebody who knows the tool and knows your client, to really make sure that tools like ChatGPT are giving you information that isn't just eloquent, but is actually informative and isn't misleading. They're really good at language, really, really, really good at language. And so when the problem that you're expressing is a language problem, how do I communicate this? Analyze this piece of language and give me some other response to it. It tends to do really well. the more esoteric the subject, or the more specialized, or the more relevant or recent to current events, it's maybe not going to necessarily have all of that information. So we need to make sure that we backfill that and backstop that with our own human knowledge. I think that using something like ChatGPT to accelerate a debrief is great, but you can't just throw reports into it and copy and paste the responses and, head out for a tea time. You still have to bring your own expertise into the mix. And I think that it's really important that we use these tools, realizing that people are starting to recognize what ChatGPT generated content sounds like and feels like. There's a shape to it, and people can feel it. I get so many spam emails from people trying to sell me on services that are very clearly, they've scraped my LinkedIn and they use that to generate a email that's personalized to me, and they're very interested in talking to me, but it all feels the same, and it all feels robotic and hollow and ungenuine. And I'm much less likely to respond to one of those because it's borderline offensive to me. It feels like they're lying to me. It feels like they're saying, I'm really interested in you. And I know that they've never thought about me for a second in their lives. They just pushed a button somewhere. So as we're using these tools, I think it's really, really important that we not sacrifice the human elements, that we not sacrifice relationship. We use these tools to cut out the work that gets in the way of relationship, so that we can spend more time doing the human to human stuff. I think that's where it really matters.
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking as you were talking about that, it's probably one of my biggest pet peeves when I see something that is so obviously generated by AI, and it took the humanness, it took the Chris out of it, or it took the Courtney out of it, right? Because there's a tone and there's a way that I communicate with you, Courtney. You'd know sometimes that there are certain phrases or things that I would say that probably don't get picked up in an AI generator.
Well, and you can build AIs that can learn to speak Brittney perfectly.
That's scary.
Yes.
It is kind of scary.
But if the application of that is done correctly, that's where we get the things like translation sounding correctly. You can't just give it a statement and say, translate this concept. You have to tell it the intent. You have to have a conversation to make sure that it fully understands and that it knows how to speak in that particular voice. Like, there are applications where that isn't so scary. It is actually useful.
Well, and I think it comes back to this idea of genuine relationship and deception. If people clue in to the fact that you are replacing your relationship with them with a ChatGPT subscription, they're not going to be very interested in that. But if you're using these tools to facilitate relationship building, to facilitate connection, and to spend more time face-to-face with people, I think that's a net positive.
I love that. So thinking about the scaries, what are the other things that we genuinely should be concerned about? Are there things that come with AI? I mean, I feel like there's good and bad with everything in life. Are there areas that we should kind of be concerned about or be kind of, keeping an eye on as this continues to become more prevalent and in our day to day? Should we be looking at anything and going, I don't know, or scared? I'm hearing don't be scared. That's what I'm hearing.
But you should always be cautiously optimistic about things like this. So one of the things that I know that I've read a lot about is it is something that, again, that was based on human knowledge, and humans are biased, and the less people of different backgrounds that we have interacting with it and backfilling that knowledge, the more of a gap of knowledge moving from stereotype to stereotype that we're going to find with this. So that is something that I know is kind of scary, because it's doing things like analyzing if you should change someone's credit card limit to looking at their social media, looking at their online everything, taking a look. And it used to be if you shopped at Walmart, they might change your credit limit just going through your data. But now they're taking you into account as a whole person. And the less that you have individual people talking about why it is that they're interested in things and why these things are showing up on their particular social media and kind of backfilling that data, it's going to have a bias against it. So you want more people of different backgrounds to be interacting with it and backfilling.
So when you say backfilling, does that just mean using it, or that means actually I don't have an eloquent way to say this, but like dumping information into it? Or is it just that interaction? Or if you say, no, that's bad, right? Like in ChatGPT, you can give it the thumbs up or the thumbs down, right? Is that what you're talking about? Or is it a little bit more intense?
How do you see the backfilling being more?
Well, it's all AI application comes down to how good is your data. And there are several schools of thought. One is you just put all the data in the world into it and let it sort it out. And then there are other schools of thought that specific and careful curation of data can produce superior tools. And I think that both of those are true to an extent. But at the end of the day, your tool is only going to be as good as the data that you choose to train it with. So something like ChatGPT, for example, was predominantly trained on English text produced in Western countries. And so it's going to have biases towards the way that we speak and the kinds of things that we talk about and the values that we hold. And that's not necessarily bad, but it may be incomplete. And there are all kinds of ways to account for that and adjust for that, some good, some bad. We've all famously heard of Google Gemini's missteps. They were so invested in making sure that the tool was not centered on one particular group of people that it started producing very multi-ethnic Nazis. And you can go too far in either direction. At the end of the day, though, what it comes down to is, do you have a broad data set that's representative of the kinds of things that you want to get out of it?
Mm-hmm. So any other concerns other than, that bias piece, which is interesting because we're talking about a piece of technology. How is a technology biased? But it's built by humans, right? So is there anything else that we should really think about or be concerned or keep an eye on when we're using these things?
There's all kinds of things. Anytime you have a new technology, it's going to be disruptive. And I think that there are probably many roles today which will not exist in their same form a few years from now. So just in general, I think it's a good idea to be looking at ways to use new and emerging technology always, but particularly in an inflection point like this, to upskill, to stay at the edge of your market, to not get complacent being where you have been. Because, one of the examples I like to use is that we don't have typists anymore. It used to be that there was an entire industry around operating a typewriter and taking dictation because making mistakes on a typewriter is expensive. And then the word processor came along, and all of a sudden, nobody needs typists anymore. And it's not that the need to type things into a computer went away or into a typewriter went away, but rather that the tools got better such that that particular role went away and evolved. So we have to be sure that we are constantly evolving with these tools, that we are not staying static. The other thing is that I think we have to be careful to not let them replace our own will, drive, curiosity, ambition. We're already seeing some early studies in the academic world where students are, their own academic performance has sharply declined as ChatGPT has risen. Memory, things like people's ability to retain information is diminishing. And we've seen some of this with the advent of search engines. Researchers have said there's this clear delineation in generations. You've kind of got the pre-search engine people who keep everything in their head and the post-search engine people who just know how to go find stuff. And I think that we're probably seeing another shift like that with the popularization of these tools, where people are neglecting to develop certain skills because they can offload them to ChatGPT. And while that can be valuable, I think we have to be careful to not neglect them entirely. When we were all in school, we weren't allowed to use calculators on our math.
Right.
And it's not because you do math better without a calculator, but because you need to understand how to do it without the calculator in order to be able to do math correctly. I think ChatGPT is a little similar. It's the most powerful calculator that we've seen in human history. And I can teach you how to use the calculator, but then you're only going to be as good as the training that you got and the calculator's ability. And what we really want to do is we want to make sure that we are keeping ourselves sharp, that we understand what it is that we're doing, and that these tools, these calculators, are just used to accelerate the work that we do.
That's a great description. So I've learned today that it's a massive spreadsheet and that it's the most complex calculator known to man. So thank you for painting those pictures in my head. That helps. That helps a lot. Okay, so we need to start kind of winding down. The 30 minutes has kind of flown by for us, but I'm curious if you'll leave us with, from your perspective, what's one thing that somebody who's listening to this conversation today, who maybe isn't at the same level that the two of you are in utilizing AI in your day-to-day, what's one thing that they can start kind of dipping their toe in or using AI for to help make their lives a little bit better? Chris, can we start with you?
We can. And this is a difficult question to answer. And I think it's because it really depends on what it is that you're doing, what problems you're solving, and where you need acceleration. If I was talking to another developer, I would say, go use Copilot or go use Codium. These are tools that are going to accelerate your ability to get ideas out of your head and into working code more quickly so you can build cool stuff. If you're not a developer, that's not going to be very applicable, obviously. I think that ChatGPT is a great place to start. If you haven't played with it, it's free to use, it's easy to use, and it's going to be a little different because if you're used to computing the way it has been for the last 30 years, it's, a search engine and you have to type in just the word you're looking for. And ChatGPT is something different. You have to learn how to use it. It's a different tool, but it's very flexible. It can do all kinds of really cool stuff for you. And I would say play with it, kick the tires a little bit, and be thinking about how you can use a tool that understands language and can mimic a conversation with you to enhance your own thinking. I like to encourage people to use ChatGPT as an idea generator. Don't use it to produce your final product, but go use it to as a soundboard. Use it to spitball. Use it to generate ideas. You can take those ideas and refine them. And I use it a lot when I've got most of an idea in my head and I don't quite know what the right next step is. And I'll just start throwing stream of consciousness stuff into it and just have a conversation with it. And sometimes that'll spark an idea.
Sure. We don't have to talk to ourselves anymore. We can talk to AI.
We can talk to AI.
Back.
Well, so my wife laughs at me. I have a rubber duck on my desk. His name is Frank. And Frank is my debugging buddy. There's a technique in software development called rubber duck debugging, where when you're stuck, you explain a problem to an object, such as a duck. And in the process of explaining the problem, very frequently you'll come up with a solution.
Okay.
And ChatGPT is a very capable duck that can actually talk back. So it's just great for moving past writer's block, for moving past that squishy part of ideation where you can see the vague outline of an idea, but you can't see the specifics.
Brilliant. Brilliant way to start. How about you, Miss Courtney?
I generally recommend the first time that you use it, if you're overwhelmed, is the best time. Get in there, turn on your talk to text, and just start talking. Tell it everything that you're thinking about that's overwhelming you, and ask it to help you make a plan. That is the most effective thing I think I've used it for people who are just starting out. Being able to organize their brains, make a to-do list, just get everything out in front of them so they can actually see it in an organized manner and less chaos inside their actual head.
I will say the hack of turning on your talk to text, game changer. You told me that.
So you're not
Beautiful.
having to type everything out.
Yes.
You're more conversational that
way. And it makes things go so much quicker.
So much quicker.
Yes. Well, thank you both for joining us and having this conversation. I'm sure it's going to spark lots of ideas and maybe some questions headed our way. So beware. We may have some additional questions, but really appreciate you sitting down and chatting with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
So thank you for tuning in to Working Progress. We're looking forward to our next great episode and another great conversation. We'll see you next time.